This movie takes place traveling through Asia. Kind of the backstory. Do you remember the movie The Secret some years ago?
I know the book The Secret. I've never seen the movie. Yeah.
So the movie came out, then the book followed, and The Secret was the best-selling documentary of all time ever. So it's kind of this big splash, but it really was the powers of the mind, and kind of led to the movement of, or fostered the movement of, using your mind to create what you want in your reality, basically. So 2 years ago, the people from The Secret, they called me saying they're going to do a new documentary, and what they wanted was people with extraordinary abilities, like in the Qigong space, or in the healing space, or in the meditation space, something that they could demonstrate, let's say on film, or anything of a point of interest that I might have come across in all my studies and travels and whatnot. So a colleague of mine, he has made it his sort of life's work. He's an anthropologist, Qigong master, to study people with extraordinary abilities, and some of which are, mind power, and energetic powers. And his training has taken him through Russia, China, Indonesia, Tibet, and India. And so we basically filmed for 2 years on all these places and found...
So this is now independent of the other people?
This is totally independent of the other people.
That's just a film they're doing?
That was a film were doing, and then now I've subsumed all the rights to that footage and the whole project.
To their whole film?
This is all
What
now.
happened to them?
They went off and did another meditation movie. It's the guys who doing the Stillness Project out of Australia. It's basically mindfulness, and they did another movie which is more a heartfelt story on people who've used meditation to overcome really traumatic things. Post-traumatic stress from war and things like that. So we really had a totally different feel. So we just divided the two projects, and I've taken kind of the reins on this one, and they went off and did something else.
Oh, so now you own this, or they?
Yeah.
You just bought it from them?
I just bought it from them basically after a year or two of negotiations and figuring we have a little bit of a partnership too. The movie follows one of my colleagues and friends. His name's David Verdesi. He's an Italian anthropologist, and he's kind of found people all over Asia with sort of, let's say, extraordinary abilities, and we kind of vetted them, had a scientist on staff while we went there to make sure there wasn't just magic or trickery, and filmed people doing cool stuff.
Like what kind of thing?
Like, Qi, let's say Qi techniques where they're using their energy, where they really develop strong electricity. Like if you hold their hand, it really feels like a volt of about 220 currents. So all your muscles get contracted.
You did that?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. So I've done that. I've traveled around the world. I've seen those guys before. What's interesting is you can find these people in India, in China, and Indonesia. And it started thousands of years ago. The arc of it is Kundalini Yoga 3,000-4,000 years ago. A wandering monk named Bodhidharma went into China, and he was one of the founders of Shaolin temples. So in Shaolin temples, you see these guys doing extraordinary abilities, martial arts-wise. Something very specific called Iron Shirt, where you can punch them or hit them with baseball bats, or the famous sword at the throat where they push really. Yeah. So those are the Shaolin temples. So these are sort of, let's call it Qigong and energetic abilities where they train really hard. It's actually about a year or two of pretty solid training. I always think of those guys as like the Olympic athletes of martial arts world. So they can do things most people can't do, but it's a very specific kind of training. And the person who we're following in the film, he can do a lot of those things. So when I was...
This guy David?
David, yeah. He could do all of that. And there's some funny stories around him trying to do that, and one of which he cut his carotid artery in attempt.
Doing that thing?
He just wasn't full enough chi, and then...
Oh my
He was at a party. And so the story goes, he's at a party and everybody's too drunk to drive. So he's got this spear in his throat, and he knows enough to hold it in there. So he has to drive himself to the hospital with the spear sticking out, and walks into the hospital and like, hey, can you guys do something about this? Because I'm going to take it out. And, so he's got a nice scar here. So his story is really fascinating, of all his challenges and trying to, because he's a Westerner and in this very Eastern secretive sort of practices.
Yeah.
So it's been a fascinating journey of us finding people with these talents and showcasing them, trying to explain it in terms of a Western mind and ways in which we can think about it, and then also making it relevant to modern people, because just because somebody can win a gold medal in a 100-yard dash or pole vault doesn't make it necessarily relevant to our lives. And so we're trying to make it really relevant to our lives in the same way. Olympic athletes, what might be relevant to our lives would be, yes, it's good to exercise, move our bodies, but we don't have to strive to become gold medalists, but we want to strive to become healthy and fit in a certain respect. Right. So this is going to be like fitness of the mind, fitness of the spirit, kind of defining what our human potential is. Right. And so that's what the movie is really about. And it's got some extraordinary footage where you're like, wow, it has a wow factor to it. And a lot of people are like, is that real? Is it not real? And what we're kind of just exploring is the inquiry of, what is our human potential? So maybe that's a good question to start with. And, from your background and your perspective.
Well, Lee, it's very interesting when you talk about the Shaolin practice of leaning on that sword, the spear, and then putting it right here. Because I had the opportunity teaching in Asia, in Singapore, of meeting someone who had done that demonstration. I actually got a video of it. It was just so unbelievable. And then we had dinner together. And I had been given the opportunity after his demonstration to do a meditation called the Wheel of Awareness practice, which actually was created around this table, where there's this center glass hub and this outer wooden rim, and I think we did that together in your center. Yeah. And he did it, and he said that the space he goes into before he does any of those practices is the hub. And so that was really interesting because I had done it with about 10,000 people by that time and had done a survey basically of what people felt when they take this spoke, move it around the rim of the knowns of consciousness, but then take a moment and bend the spoke around right into the hub itself of pure awareness. And we can talk about that, but I think if this one example is useful, it's to think about the conversation of what actually is energy. What do we know about how human beings can learn to be sensitive to energy and then to shape energy, which I think you can. And in this particular person's case, he was so excited to hear kind of the meditation view of what he was doing in his own practice, but then there's this scientific potential explanation for what we do in these practices that release this huge amount of energy, whether it's about what you do with your body or what you do with your mind or what you learn to do in your relationships. So we can talk about that.
That's fantastic, fascinating, because David describes, that there's some characteristics that all these masters show, whether it's a martial arts master, a master of meditation, spiritual master, and that there's sort of 5 distinct things that they do with their mind to get them into a particular state that allows human potential to be activated. Mm-hmm. And one is, in various ways, is to quiet the mind or to turn attention onto the quietness or the stillness that already exists in the mind. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, turning the spoke back on itself. And by the way, this, one of my favorite meditations, because it just is so simple and so clear how you've described it.
The Wheel of Awareness.
The Wheel of Awareness, yeah. And I just feel like it can fit, whether it's energetic meditation, because I teach a lot of, let's say, Qigong techniques where you're focusing on energy, but that's just another place the spoke can go to, is to sense and feel energy in your body, and then to curve back onto itself and be in touch with your, field of potential or the mind of awareness seems to be one of the keys to unlocking human potential.
Yeah, well, exactly. We could talk about that. What were the other 4? You said there were 5.
Okay, so really, David describes the mind and its workings as, first, we want to be able to see the mind clearly, observe the mind clearly in its facets. So, I see this as like, what can we pay attention to? Mm-hmm. There's a meditation that's similar that he teaches. It's like an self-inquiry meditation. It's kind of Zen, where you say, where am I? You ask yourself this question, and then immediately think of the Wheel of Awareness, because you can say, well, I'm here in this moment because I can see, I can hear, I can feel, I can put attention on these things. I can turn my mind inward and I can feel my bones, I can feel my inner landscape of my body. I can feel and sense my thoughts or my emotions. And so this is some very similar ways in which we can drop into the moment and access inner power. Well, you were talking about energy, and I'm curious to...
What are the other 3?
The other 3, oh, sorry, yeah. So that's...
I'm interviewing you.
Yeah, no, it's a conversation. Let's go back and forth. I'm more used to being interviewed than I am to be the interviewee. So we have that as see the mind clearly, and then focus the mind, being able to hold attention on one thing for longer than what he says, like 8 seconds. Because the mind usually tries to bounce away from a thought to a thought to a thought, or paying attention to, let's say, the sense of sight. In 8 seconds, it's hard to just hold it on a particular spoke of the wheel. So he's saying, we have to see the mind clearly and then focus the mind, be able to hold attention longer than 8 seconds. And this is sort of the yoga of the mind, being able to concentrate the mind and the mind's energy. Then as we progress through the movie, the activation of powers and potential, this is a curious point that I wanted to get to later in the interview, but why don't we just dive in? But being able to move the point of awareness of your mind into different locations. So for example, when we're self-identified, we usually think of ourselves coming from here. So if we were to observe our hands, where do you observe your hands from? Most people, it's up in this area, at least in the Western world.
Yeah,
we look from here.
Because otherwise they might say
it might be the heart. So part of the practice is to be able to create a flexible mind, so a focused mind, and then a flexible mind, being able to move this point of awareness. Within the body is the first step, and then what he says, the fourth step, is to be able to move the point of awareness outside of the body. So, in the same sense, we could almost observe ourselves having this conversation from the ceiling.
Yeah, shift perspective.
Shift perspective. And so to move the point of awareness, and then to be able to dissolve the mind, the localized personal identification of what we think of as mind, Li, in this body, into like what he calls the higher mind. In Buddhism, it would be the Buddha mind, where you feel that, let's say, you're more identified with the field as opposed to the localized field of me, so you can connect to the, let's say, the divine mind of the universe.
Yeah.
So
and those are the 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's like totally consistent with the whole wheel of awareness, and from a science point of view, and then the contemplative practices that exist. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What's the difference between, let's say, wheel of awareness and even mind sight with, let's say, a Buddhist practice of Vipassana?
So this table sat in a patient office, and 2 things had come up in kind of a scientific search for some universals, what E.O. Wilson would call consilience. They were, number one, they had a process called integration was the basis of well-being, and we'll see if it fits with superpowers. The second was that consciousness was needed for change, which actually relates to the 5 elements that you're looking into. So I thought, what if you said if integration is needed for health and consciousness is needed for change, what if you integrated consciousness? So this wheel, this table, basically became a way where integration is differentiating something and then in a system and then linking those differentiated parts to each other. So in consciousness, it can simply be defined as the experience of knowing, and we put that in the visual metaphor of a hub, and then the experience of the knowns, which we put all around the rim. And you can see how this is divided into 4 segments. One segment would be energy patterns from outside the body that you pick up with hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, 5 senses. Then you move this spoke, you see the spoke here, over to the next segment, one by one, looking at the interior energy patterns from the body, so muscles, bones, genitals, internal organs. You then explore all those one by one. So now you're really building this focused attention capacity and to shift from thing to thing over that 8-second period, much longer than 8 seconds. And then you are moving to a 3rd segment of the rim, which is mental activities like emotions, mood, intentions, thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, longings, desires. All that stuff and more are mental activities over there. And at that moment, what I would do with my patients is just open awareness up to whatever was happening. So you're beginning to really distinguish hub from rim there. And then in an advanced practice, we actually bend the spoke around or retract the spoke or just leave the spoke in the hub or have no spoke at all, just rest in the hub. And amazing things started happening, as you saw when we did this up in Big Sur. What was striking was how universal this experience was. So I could do this in Asia with people who ran monasteries, and they'd have a very similar experience to someone who's never meditated a day in their lives. So that was fascinating. And then the 4th segment of the rim, you could simply call a relational sense. It's what you're talking about, this larger perspective that you realize you are a part of something much larger than your body. and this includes interpersonal relationships. It includes not just people you know in your connections with them, but people within your community, people you work with, people in your city, your state, your province, your country, the world, and all of nature.
Beautiful.
And that's it. And then, I presented this to a research lab once, and Richie Davidson's lab, and they said, "Oh my God, that's so cool! It's not based on contemplative practice." So in terms of your question, what's its relationship to other forms of practice? It comes from literally integrating consciousness. But they said, studying contemplative practices, we've just studied one that also seems to integrate things. I said, "What's that?" And they said, "It's loving kindness statements." And I said, "Well, I've never seen research that shows that that's helpful or not helpful." They go, "Oh, well, we have a study." So they showed me that study, Barbara Fredrickson at University of North Carolina. She showed me hers. And then I said, okay. So then I added some statements of love and care that are really fun to do, especially because they end with this thing I really particularly fond of, which is this notion that you have a me and a body.
Right.
There's a we between us, but you don't have to get rid of an identity as internal. You can embrace also having an identity that's inter, but how do you bring them both together? How do you integrate identity? It's a we. Me plus we equals we.
I love it.
So we end with we.
Yeah.
And it's been just so rewarding because now, we've had tens of thousands of people do it, and with just fun and fascinating shifts in people realizing their potential, which we can talk about because the practice of the wheel is derived from science. Then I teach with people like Jack Kornfield, who are, deep scholars in Buddhist practice in this case, but also people from Christian religion and Jewish religion and the Hindu faith and the Islamic faith. And there's some fascinating consilient overlaps of this scientific practice of integrating consciousness and all the different religions that try to tap into your potential and liberate well-being.
Beautiful. I mean, there's so many overlaps too. I mean, I feel like it's an especially exciting time where ancient wisdom practices of the human potential that might have been more of a subjective experience, sitting down, meditating and going inward, doing qigong or yoga, going inward and discovering what the human potential is through that route. And then the science and the neuroscience and maybe even quantum physics now kind of converging into a similar language from different perspectives.
Exactly. In fact, if we can pause for a moment, Kate, can I ask you a favor?
Sure.
In that closet, you're going to find a pillow, and on that pillow, you're going to see basically a slide that we can show it right in that closet. Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
This survey of the Wheel of Awareness gave rise to the question, why when people get into the hub, just to look at that one part of the practice, do they describe things like, and I don't know if this happens in your exploration of people who are tapping into these very special powers, but with the wheel practice, they'll describe things like, in the hub, it was spacious, it was infinite, it was timeless, it was empty but full. I felt like I was in like an alternate state. There was this feeling of God, sense of love, this sense of an expansion of who I was. I felt connected to everything.
Absolutely.
Things like that. Have you heard that?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've seen it in being in your class, teaching meditation myself, and it's such a gift to be able to, sometimes I feel like a tour guide. You're tour guiding people, the first part of the hub and the second part is kind of like walking up the mountain and pointing out different sites, and then you point to this like, the grand vista where you're standing at the top of the mountain and there's the center of the hub and people, wow, kind of thing is like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so my question as a scientist was, what is the hub that no matter where in the world people do this very simple practice, they have these very similar statements. Everyone's unique, of course, everyone's different, but unbelievable common ground, especially when it comes to the hub.
Yeah.
So I went back to the original proposal years before that, which was that the mind, which would include our subjective experience, the felt texture of life, consciousness, the ability to be aware and to be aware of something, and information processing, our ability to talk to each other about it, that these three aspects of mind were all something called emergent aspects. So the original proposal was that the mind, our subjective experience, the felt texture of life, the ability to be aware of that experience, called consciousness, and information processing, or ability to talk about it. Those three, and even a fourth process called self-organization, which was saying that if the system of mind is something to do with an inner experience of the body and an inter-experience of your relationships, what was both within and between. And one of the proposals back in the early 90s was that it was energy.
Oh, great.
And
I can relate to that.
you can relate to that. So for me, it was a weird thing. As a scientist, people don't talk about energy really.
Right.
As a psychiatrist, they never talk about it. In mental health, you're not supposed to talk about energy unless it's like some outlying field. It's so fascinating. But to me, it was the only common ground between the inner and the inter. So say a neuroscientist studies energy patterns in the brain. I'm an attachment researcher. I study patterns between children and their parents. That's energy patterns called communication.
Yeah.
So what's within and between is energy.
Yeah.
So the proposal back in the early 90s was the mind might be an emergent, which is a math term,
Yeah.
straight out of math, an emergent property, meaning the stuff of a system is interacting with itself and then giving rise to something that's bigger than the stuff itself. That's what an emergent property is.
Okay, makes sense.
So one of those emergent properties is called self-organization, if it's what's called a complex system. Anyway, so these four facets, the early proposal are possibly emergent properties, each of the four of them: subjective experience, consciousness, information processing, self-organization, would each be somehow emerging from energy information flow within the whole body, not just your brain, and in the betweenness of this body and other bodies and nature. So that was the proposal.
Beautiful. It sounds very Qi terms, like when I read Qi history books, it has a lot of these similar explanations in terms of, hey, I have my energy. There's lots of different kinds of energy, like the classic of Chinese medicine. The Yellow Emperor's classic of Chinese medicine, written some 4,000 years ago, talks about different kinds of Qi. I'm sure you've read it.
No.
Yellow.
Well, I just read it last night, but not this morning.
It's a real page turner. It's like Harry Potter, but a little more boring. It talks about different kinds of energy. So there's my energy, and within me there's a lot of energy too. So energy, let's just define it as aliveness. What keeps me alive? So we have heart energy, we have liver energy, digestive energy. Breath is a form of energy, but this isn't just a closed system, so we have to take energy in. When I inhale, I'm taking energy in from nature. So this is sort of my extended body of Qi. And there's energy between us. So my energy is going to shift whether we have a positive interaction or a negative interaction. There's energy I have to take in with food. If I eat healthy food, my Qi in my body responds by elevating. If I eat toxic food, my Qi does something different. So there's all these different kinds of energy, and this sort of the alchemy of the energy, this blending together of all the different energy gives us this overall energy, and our relationship in ourselves between, let's say, maybe our thoughts, our emotions, our physicality, and then our energy between each other, and then our relationship with, let's say, the divine.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. So if you build on that, and it's such a great description, go to one way you would think about it from a scientific point of view is the first phase is to say, well, energy has different forms and qualities, and I'm an acronym addict, so please excuse this acronym.
Yeah.
But if you think about the word cliff, energy has contours to it, locations, intensities, like amplitude and frequency, right, and density, frequency and form. So I can go or different frequency of sound, right?
Right.
I can project it there, project it there, it can come from this body, that body. So
I love that, by the way. The acronym helps. That works with me.
Yeah. So you go, what's the cliff of your energy right now? So that's fun, right? Because the contours can be, I was way up here and now I'm down there, and that shift. Whereas if I start here and I go to there, it's not such a big shift.
Right.
So sometimes it's just the contour
Right.
that really makes a difference in our subjective experience. So when I was with, amazingly, 150 physicists for a week in an old monastery, and I was like a kid in a candy store because all I did was ask them two questions. What is energy? Because they're the experts in science and energy. And what's time? Right?
Beautiful.
And luckily we had enough time and I had enough energy to ask these questions.
I've never been in a room with 150 physicists.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. We could wander around the monastery and everything like that. So the first thing they said, of course, is that there's no such thing as energy. I go, what do you mean? They go, there are manifestations of energy, like light energy, sound energy, the energy of your body is different forms. So I said, okay, I get it. They said, just like there's no such thing as a mammal, right? Because there's no mammal, there are examples of mammals.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
There's a human, there's a monkey, there's a cat, there's a dog, right? There's a rat. So you can't show me mammal, just like you can't show me energy, but you can show me examples of mammals, and you can show me examples of energy. So I said, okay, cool, fine. There's no such thing as energy itself. There's different manifestations of it. So I said, I'm a biologist, so I can say what a mammal is. They go, okay. So I said, you're a physicist, tell me what energy is. They go, oh, that's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I go, okay, what? So lean in for this.
Okay. I'm ready.
Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality.
Whoa. These are mystics. I don't know if they're physicists.
I know.
That's awesome.
Well, a dear friend of mine was a mystic, John O'Donohue.
Yeah.
And he used to say,
wonderful.
he's great.
Yeah.
He used to say, I said, what's a mystic, John? He said, a mystic is someone who believes in the reality of the invisible. Right? So that's what a scientist really needs to be.
Yeah.
So the movement from possibility to actuality, I went absolutely nuts because,
Cool.
it's basically what they describe is that there's a sea of potential. This is physics terms. Which is the formless source of all form. That's physics speak.
It sounds like Taoism.
I know,
right?
Isn't it amazing?
Because Taoism, this starts from the Wu Qi, the field of emptiness, the field of potential.
Yeah.
Then it manifests into the way, which means Tao. Tao means the way that the nature is. And the first passage of the Tao Te Ching says the Tao that can be described is not the real Tao. So same thing, mammal. It has no descriptions. It's pre-form. So it's the invisible energy taking shape into physical form that can't be conceptualized in our nervous system or in our mind. It's beyond that.
Yeah.
And then it takes form in the 5 elements, which is what we find in embodied form and physicality in this world here. But pre that is this mystical, undefinable universe that then gives birth to all these things into manifestation.
Yeah, so that's so beautiful because this would be a great example of what E.O. Wilson would probably use the word consilience for, meaning here's a field of Taoism which in its deep, disciplined way is trying to articulate its perspective on reality, and here's a field called physics, which is just using a different methodology, part of science, to make hypotheses, to challenge them, to try to disprove them, and to systematically be open to saying what I said last week is wrong. Let's go on to what we think is true now.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty that I love about science.
Yeah.
So this would be a consilient moment. So, I tried to graph it out for some of the students who were there, graduate students and undergraduates. And so I drew on a napkin, actually, and then in a journal, and then ultimately one of my students put it on a pillow, this mapping of this thing. So let's see what this looks like.
Yeah.
If you make a graph where basically you have on the vertical axis of this diagram, which is called the y-axis, what's called a probability distribution curve.
Actuality.
Where the top is actuality at 100%, the bottom is potentiality or possibility, which is called near zero. It'd be like if you and I share 1 million vocabulary words and I'm about to think of one, what's your chance of knowing what that one is?
Very small.
Very small.
Right.
1 out of 1 million, so we call it near zero.
Right.
So that'd be down at the bottom. This x-axis going across would be the clock time as things change. This axis going in and out of the plane of the pillow would be called diversity. So don't worry about that so much now. But the bottom line is when you make it three-dimensional, it becomes at the very bottom where all possible things happen.
Okay.
So this is what the physicists would say correlates in this diagram with what they have described as the sea of potential. Otherwise,
this would be the Tao. The Tao,
would that be that? Yeah.
The sea of potential, where things are born
Arising from. Okay, the formless source of all form.
Right.
Well, that's physics talk, right? So they would also call this the quantum vacuum.
Okay.
Now, a couple of things about it are amazing. When you start moving above this quantum vacuum, where there's potential energy, you now start having the manifestation of actual energy. So the wording gets a little clunky if you're going to be really respectful of the physicists, and I really try to be in my writing. So for example, if we were going to talk about just words related to words that began with the letter T, there would be a subset of them up here, and only certain of them would come up. But if it were just going to be one of the 5 oceans, it would be a much higher area up here with a smaller circle.
Oh, okay.
Right? So let's say there were only 5 oceans, your chance would be knowing 1 out of 5, but if it's just T words, maybe it's 1 out of 100,000 or something. So these we're going to call plateaus, and then you have these peaks of actuality. So I think what the mind is, actually, is this emergent property of energy where thought, emotion, or memory would be peaks. Thinking, emoting, and remembering would be these sub-peak areas of where energy flow is happening.
In the space between?
Well, in the movement of energy in this probability,
gotcha.
along the probability curve. Then you have these plateaus, which would be mood, intention, and state of mind. And we'll talk about this in regard to superpowers in a moment. And then the amazing thing is, let's think about what they said. People getting to the hub of the wheel say it's empty but full. It's as wide as the sky. It's timeless. So when you look at what physics now says about reality, there are 2 realms of one reality. One realm is called the Newtonian realm because Sir Isaac Newton studied it 350 years ago. It's large objects like your body. These are called macro states. So it's studied in classical physics, so these 3 things are synonyms. Newtonian, classical, macro state physics. Those are 3 synonyms.
Beautiful.
In that world, there's an unfolding of time called the arrow of time. So if you and I break open an egg, we can't unbreak the egg, right? So it has the awareness. When we're aware of that, we call it time. It's a directionality of change in the macro state world. In the micro state world, which is a thing as small as an electron or a photon, it's units of energy called quanta. And energy is actually a probability field. And interestingly, in the quantum realm, things are not noun-like entities as they appear in the macro state realm. They're verb-like events.
Wow, beautiful.
And they're timeless. So I think what happens, is that this is where awareness comes from. Is that written on here somewhere? No, she didn't put it on there. Okay, well, let's put it on there. That awareness...
Hello.
I have a t-shirt that's a little more thorough. So this is the source of awareness. So this is the metaphor of the wheel of awareness correlates with the proposal that awareness arises when the energy probability position has moved into the plane of possibility, the sea of potential. And when you drop there, you get this feeling it's empty but full because it's empty of actuality but full of possibility. People talk about this as God. Which, as an acronym addict, I very respectfully offer them as a scientist. It's the generator of diversity.
Wow.
And so far, when I've presented this to religious leaders, whether they're theistic or non-theistic, no one has felt offended by that.
That's amazing.
This God fits with Christian religion of a mystical nature, Jewish religion of a mystical nature. It
Buddhism,
fits with,
Eastern religions,
which don't have the theistic view. So it's been so interesting. This would be the universal consciousness, or otherwise known as what's it called? There's universal. You call it before Buddha consciousness. Things like that.
Mind.
So this is a proposal of the nature of mind, and we can use this if you want to look at your question: what are superpowers based on? And what does it really mean for a person to be practicing something? Whether you're focusing chi, like I think I told you when I was in medical school. We learned to focus chi right here in our hands.
Absolutely.
And then to actually treat people without ever touching their bodies. And it was a training that went over 6 months from a master from Japan. Beautiful. So I absolutely believe in opening up to that, and also just from a mind point of view with my patients doing the wheel over all these decades, it's been absolutely amazing to see the joy and freedom that is released. And one of the biggest challenges is that, if you can see it on this graph, this is the wildest thing. Awareness coming from this plane of possibility is also a correlate with maximal uncertainty. So some people have a plateau that says, uncertainty is dangerous. I need to be certain of things. So don't give me to this spacious open place. And when they do that, it's understandable that they're trying to protect themselves. But the synonym for uncertainty is freedom and possibility.
Yeah, beautiful.
So this is where, when you guide people to letting go of making things happen or owning things, but dropping into the plane and letting things emerge, they actually, ironically, with that inner practice, learn that there's no one that's like a noun. It's just like a verb.
Yeah.
And then you dive in this incredible sense of freedom, and powers are released.
This is what we call flow state too, because really, what is your relationship to the unknown? Because sometimes a lot of people, their relationship to the unknown is to contract, overthink. I need to have security, but really, what do we know about tomorrow? What are we going to think tomorrow at noon? What are we going to feel tomorrow? Is a lot of unknowns. So we try to have some semblance of control when, a lot of these mystical practices say, just relax, get into this flow state. And this is what Qigong's all about. Face the unknown with relaxation, and you get into flow where you have access to this field.
Well, exactly. And I don't know if this fits with what you've been discovering, but there's an incredible wisdom that is released. And when you look at the studies of wisdom, it's a consilient finding that, ironically, a person in a village, let's say, or a town, who said that person is a wise member of our society. This is a person who has deep inner knowledge, but at the same time realizes that what life is all about is being of service to what's called, quote, others, because they realize others are themselves.
Yeah,
This is where the word we comes in so beautifully. You say, you want to do the me journey of an internal aspect. In some ways, that's the noun-like body you have, and that's fine. But then you realize you're a we-like verb that you don't have to control, you just live in service of that.
Right, wonderful. I think, what I just love about your work is the way in which we can bridge science, Newtonian physics, quantum physics, and sort of this third aspect, which is the mystical. And, I think this is what these masters of ancient wisdom have been able to do, is to really drop in and bridge the quantum and the Newtonian in ways they just stretch it a little bit. So when they think or have intention, there's more impact in physical reality. So we have some masters being able to, have intention and move people, or some masters being able to demonstrate, with training, lots of chi out of their hands. And I always find it fascinating that this physical world, Newtonian in my body, and this mental world, which maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, this quantum way in which the mind works and how those bridge and overlap and influence reality.
No, it's a great question. I think the first thing to say, anyone who might be listening in on our conversation would very appropriately have a doubting mind and say, what are these two talking about? What are they talking about? So when I published a book on the wheel called Aware, I was very nervous, because as a scientist working in the mental health world, there's a real push, number one, to not use the word energy. Number two, to never use the word quantum. I mean, those are like taboo. Both of those.
Okay.
But the whole end of that book is saying I had no way to explain the survey of these 10,000 people who'd done the wheel without going to energy. And then once you go to energy, you talk to physics, you have to go to quantum, because that's just the reality. So a month before Aware came out, on the cover story of Scientific American, a very conservative, popular science magazine, was, when does the quantum world meet the Newtonian world?
Beautiful, wow.
And it was like, oh my God, if it's the cover of some, we're here. So it was the month before, and I took a deep breath of relief. I think we were teaching actually right then.
Yeah, we were.
And it was like, wow, this is amazing, because people who listen to us should be very skeptical, say, oh, what's this energy schmenergy thing? Here's the reality of it, that when you start applying things like quantum physics to the mind, you want to be very conservative. So I work with quantum physicists, and I'm always referring literally what I say to them and say, is this consistent with the science? And if so, that's great. If not, let me change it. So you'll see the way I word stuff about energy. You can't say energy's in the plane of possibility. You say potential energy. So it becomes energy when it lifts above the plane. So that's just an awkward thing, but that's how they corrected me. Beautiful. But otherwise, people, the quantum physicists I work with, are extremely excited about this. It's not said by quantum physicists, but it's consistent with the rigorous science. So a couple of things in what you just said. One is this is new, so as a proposal, it could be completely wrong. Mm-hmm. And everyone listening should know this is just a proposal. Mm-hmm. It's conciliant with the science, meaning it's consistent with what quantum physics says. Mm-hmm. It's consistent with the survey of the wheel. Does it match? I think so, but it could not. It could be completely wrong.
And it's consistent with thousands of years of mystical, subjective experience.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's from Taoism, from Buddhism, from the Islamic faith, from Hinduism, from the Jewish religion, from the Christian religion, from Irish mysticism.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
It's remarkable, yeah.
It's remarkable. So that doesn't make it right.
No.
So we want to always be doubting. I mean, I'm a very doubting person. So, but
keep
if
your mind open to the
keep your mind
possibilities,
open,
right? Yeah.
So if this is true, there are 7 implications that relate to what you're saying, Lee. And, again, I'll say it one more time because people always say, stop saying that. It could be completely wrong, right. And that's okay. I mean, in science, that's the fun thing about being a scientist.
In an infinite universe, there are possibilities of being wrong.
Okay,
all the time,
all right,
right?
but it could be maximally wrong.
Yeah, maximally, yeah.
Completely misguided. But if it's right, here's a couple things it means. Number one, it's a proposal for the origin of consciousness.
Okay, right.
That's really exciting.
That is exciting, yeah.
Number two, it means that the place in reality, and physicists will say, some physicists say, reality is a manifestation of energy. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or others will say, no, reality is a manifestation of information, and energy arises from information. The other ones are saying information arises from configurations of energy. So sometimes you'll hear me say, in fact often, the phrase energy and information to make both physicists happy.
Okay, that's great.
Energy, information.
Can I clarify?
Yeah.
So sometimes I think of, in Taoism we say, yang energy, more projective energy is attention. This is kind of how I'm bridging it. This is kind of me bridging mysticism and maybe more modern mind. So we have attention and intention. So yin would be more intention holding some information. Attention, pure energy without information yet. And these two would be the yin and yang of the mind.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Is that interesting? Okay.
Well, when you get deeply into the mathematics of information, I think that would be beautifully conciliant because they would say something like, I'm probably saying this in a too simplified way, of course, but it's something like information is when energy is no longer openly random.
Oh, okay.
So it's achieved some kind of organization to its patterning that they would just call information. To get a feeling for that, it would be like the difference between blah, 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 and me saying, hello, Lee. Right? And that's the extreme. Like, hello, Lee is sound waves, but they have a certain shared symbolic meaning. That's more intuitive. What
that makes
you mean
sense,
by information. Yeah,
my 8-year-old does both.
Okay, right. But you want to drop into pure energy, like if you're dancing around, and, you want to just be in pure energy. So that's really interesting. Now you're pointing out something, attention versus intention, which in this, in the cognitive science world would be something more like attention is that process, whether it's internal or interpersonal or out in the world, that is directing the flow of energy and information. Whereas intention is what might be called a vector, meaning setting a directionality, but not exactly determining which way it goes. Does that sound?
Yeah, that absolutely does.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe let's say in meditation, if you're just mindful, I'm just being mindful of my body and putting in, attention on, say, on my muscles, paying attention, observing, versus now I'm telling my muscles to relax, or I'm visualizing bright red color. Now I have an intention of bringing healing into particular areas, or relaxing muscles rather than just being attentive to them. So one has a little bit more direction, one has a little bit more just pureness to it.
Beautiful. Yeah. So that would be attention versus intention, but it would also bring in the word awareness, because attention has a more, the directionality to it, and awareness is more receptive. Well, here you can see where it's this, if it really is this plane of possibility, it's more this kind of open, spacious place, if you will. This isn't a physical place, but it's a mathematical space, actually. So that's the first issue. The second issue is awareness, then, if this proposal is true, would be the exact same space of maximal uncertainty. So as we talked about, some people freak out about that. So in your question about superpowers, for someone to be trained in that, in a way they have to let go of certainty. And there's a beautiful quote on at the entrance to the Brooklyn Public Library.
Okay.
And Caroline, my wife, and I were visiting our daughter Maddie, and she lives there. And we go there, and it says, it was by a local artist. It said something like, becoming aware of the flimsy fantasy of certainty, comma, I let myself wander.
Well,
Flimsy fantasy of certainty. A lot of human beings imprison themselves or got imprisoned in plateaus that lock themselves onto the flimsy fantasy of certainty and live a whole life that way.
It was brilliant.
So maybe you've experienced this as a teacher. I certainly have.
Absolutely.
That part of the journey to liberation is to let go of the flimsy fantasy of certainty, which can be terrifying because it's the only thing you know, and control, just like that. Yeah. So now, ironically, you get freedom by letting go of the flimsy fantasy of certainty, a plateau that's imprisoning you. Not all plateaus are bad, as we talk about, but when they're rigid, they are. And then you drop yourself into the plane. So this second implication is, wow, this shows why uncertainty and awareness are the same deal. And so you see that then, as we said earlier, awareness, uncertainty, freedom, and possibility are the same thing. Isn't that amazing?
When it seems opposite, but you're dipping into the same pool.
You drop into there. Now, of course, if you've got a plateau that says, I'm Lee, I'm Dan, and I'm this and I'm that, that's called, in some versions, ego. Or, small self. This is where the small self, the small ego is. And when you drop beneath it, you get into freedom and possibility. Right. Okay, so that's the second implication.
Yeah.
Third implication. Look at this graph. Here's where all the other possibilities are sitting.
Yeah.
This is the plane of possibility, right? This is the sea of potential.
Yes.
This is the formless source of all form. So when you drop yourself out of these plateaus and into the open awareness, not just awareness of a particular thought,
right,
but the open awareness state, at that moment, you've placed your mind, where you are on the probability distribution position, into not only awareness, but where your other options are.
Beautiful.
You see how that works?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
This is probably why in the earlier search it was like, if you're going to parent well, you need to be conscious. If you're going to teach well, you need to be conscious. If you're going to be a therapist, you need to be conscious and have the people you're helping develop be conscious.
Yeah.
Because here's where all the options are.
Yeah.
The new options. This is where growth comes from. So this is where you drop into that spaciousness. That's number 3. Implication number 4 that blew me away, and I don't know if you've come across this, but this has been like, it just makes me emotional just to say this. This was not what I was trying to find. I was just open to saying, hey, this wheel for my patients got them over mild to moderate depression, reduced anxiety, helped them with trauma. If they're facing death, it helped them go into that place in a much more peaceful way. So I wanted to teach to my students who were therapists. They learned it. They were teaching it to their clients. They got better. I did workshops. It was amazing. So that's where the journey has been around these 20 years. So, but here's what's been fascinating about doing it in the workshops. 3 things seem to go together. And this is the 4th implication. Feeling of interconnection, open awareness, and love. Love, awareness, and interconnection. It's almost like there are 3 threads of the one fabric of the reality of life.
So beautiful.
And this tapestry just kept on coming up over and over and over again. Even one place I was teaching a parliament group in another country, and they did the practice. They share what happened during the break. One of the parliamentarians came to me and said, during the sharing thing, I didn't want to share. I noticed, he goes, do you want to know why I didn't want to share? I go, sure. And then he gets really quiet, gets very teary, and he says, do you know the part when you bend the spoke around into the hub? I go, yeah, I know that part. And he goes, I have never felt so much love.
Oh my God.
Now he's crying. Before in my life, I felt connected to everyone and everything. And now he's crying. He goes, so much love. I go, oh, so much love.
Yeah.
He goes, I go, but you didn't want to share. He goes, no. They would think I was weak.
Yeah.
So we paused, and I said, can I ask you a question? He goes, you what? I said, when you make national policy, federal law, are you leaving love out of the reasoning?
Huge.
And then his eyes got really big, and he went over to talk to his colleagues.
Yeah.
So this is a fascinating thing about this. Where are we on? Fourth implication.
Yeah.
That love and interconnection are down here, but if people are lost up here, then they don't feel like they belong.
Right.
They don't feel connected.
No,
they don't feel the love. They feel isolated. And all the depression, anxiety, and suicidality we're having now, it's almost as if people are lost in isolation, these plateaus.
Yeah.
So that's the fourth implication.
Feeling lonely too.
And feeling lonely.
Part of, I'll just interject a little bit, but part of this movie, which is so interesting, is to train or teach people how to get out of what David is calling the cave. You're trapped in the cave, like the Platonic cave, where you're looking at the shadows. Maybe, the light source is behind you, and you see the shadows, and you're thinking the shadows are what's real. But being able to turn around to face the light, or to move out of the cave, delving in there is what's liberating. So the whole movie is the journey of liberation.
Wow.
This is what this movie's about. How do we become
God.
liberated on, whether it's body out of pain, mind out of, mental stress and worry, spiritually out of feeling disconnected and into more interconnected.
Interconnection.
Yeah.
Well, that's so beautiful, and this raises the fifth implication, which maybe fits exactly with what these findings are in your journey together. The fifth implication is that your plane of possibility and the plane of possibility that comes from the experience happening out of this body are the same. Because infinity is infinity.
Yeah.
So we're differentiated. You have different plateaus and peaks than me, sure, and that's fine. We can be differentiated.
Right.
But where we really link this interconnected piece is in our plane of possibility. So the more you teach someone to do that, because I know for myself, I do this every day, and I've realized in just the experience that making this my regular practice, when I see other people on the street or in a class or just in life, it's as if they're manifestations from the same essence. That it's almost like the Pando populous forest in Utah, where there's 57,000 seemingly independent aspen trees, quaking aspen trees. But when you go 6 inches beneath the surface, it's one root ball. And when you test the DNA, it's one organism. It's amongst the oldest and largest organisms on the planet.
Yeah.
So Pando is just an icon for this notion that our bodies, in a sense, are coming out of it. We get about 100 years to live in a Newtonian body, right?
Right.
And yet we are manifestations from a quantum field of possibility that gets about 100 Newtonian years, classical years, to live that way. And yet the mind is not the same as the body. So the mind has the ability to be, I think, in Newtonian plateaus and peaks.
Yeah.
They come and go, come and go, come and go, come and go. You're not going to have an infinite amount of them. But the plane of possibility is in the quantum realm.
Right.
And this is where I think some people have said they freak out because they feel like it's timeless. It is timeless. So this raises the final two implications, 6 and 7. One is that in the quantum realm, it's kind of like, people freak out about this, but I say, look, if you swim, let's say you're doing the breaststroke, right? Sometimes you're swimming underwater and you're in the water realm, and sometimes you bring your head up for air and you're in the air realm. Like nobody freaks out and says, oh, Lee, I can't believe it. There's a water realm, there's an air realm. This is too weird. We are swimming in a reality that has two realms, just like there's a water realm and an air realm. There's a quantum realm and there's a Newtonian realm. That's been established.
Yeah, beautiful.
In physics. The mind has elements of both.
Okay.
So what I say at the end of a workshop, for example, is I say, look, it's beautiful to experience the spaciousness of the hub of the wheel, which is the plane of possibility in the quantum realm. Things are verb-like unfoldings. They're events. Rather than the fixed noun-like entities that appear separate, you experience, especially from the plane of possibility, these verb-like, deeply interconnected events. Beautiful. But when you get in your car to leave this workshop, I say, use the plateau of skills of driving a car so that when you see a red light, you press on the peak of your experience called the brakes, so you stop. Because if you don't do that, you will become one with everything in the intersection.
Really quickly, right?
Really quickly. So
exactly.
there's nothing wrong with plateaus and peaks. They let us live in these Newtonian bodies. However, we're too lost in there. So the sixth implication is that in the quantum realm, you have timelessness. There is no directionality of change. So it can feel a little freaky when you dive in there and you go, oh my God. Like I can do this thing with like 3,000 people in a room, and I'll say, okay, how many of you, when you were in the hub, and I don't count this in my data because it's just a big sampling.
Yeah.
I said, how many of you felt timeless? You'll see half the hands go up. Over 1,000 people's hands will go up. Or you saw when we did this in Big Sur, you see all these people have this timelessness.
Yeah.
So this is why, because it's without a directionality change. And that's implication number 6. Implication number 7 is completely wild, but it relates to a very controversial issue. That I was in a quantum physics think tank with one of the original students of the originators of quantum theory.
Okay.
And his name is Henry Stapp. So Henry Stapp, S-T-A-P-P-P, 2 P's, not 3 P's. 2 P's.
You added a quantum
This has
P
3
to it.
P's, yeah. P plateau and plane. This is the 3P graph. But it's Henry Stapp, S-T-A-P-P.
Okay.
So what Henry wrote about in a book, it's either called The Mindful Universe or The Conscious Universe. But Henry Stapp is the author. I can't remember which of the two it is. But what he says is that, and he was at this meeting apparently, but in Copenhagen, there was a big meeting a long, long time ago. And they were wrestling with how to make sense of a non-controversial finding, but what the controversy was, how to explain it. And that's the finding you learn in high school physics.
Yeah.
You take an electron and you shoot it through a piece of metal which has 2 slits in it.
Okay.
And when it goes through as a wave. And you can tell because on the back end of where you're shooting it through, there's a piece of photographic paper, and you can see there's something called an interference pattern.
Okay.
So depending on the wave it interferes with where it went before. Okay, fine. We know that electrons, photons are like waves.
Yeah.
You put a camera on that thing to see how it's behaving, the electron.
Yeah.
It goes through like a little pellet called a particle. And there are no more interference patterns on the photographic paper on the back. It's going through as if some of them went through this slit, some of them went through that slit. They had to choose which were they, a wave or a particle. A wave is a distribution of values that's reflecting the formless source of all form. The particle is committing to one actuality from the sea of possibilities. With me on that?
Yeah. Amazing.
So it's called collapsing the wave function.
Okay.
So that's been established.
I mean, this is the sort of the famous quantum physicist. Can a light be a wave or particle?
Right,
Can't be both.
That's where it comes
But
from.
now it is both depending on the observer. But that was a
Right.
brilliant way you just described it and made sense to me.
So this is, that's established. That's not controversial. That's
Okay.
been known for a long time, and it
Yeah.
freaks everybody out. And
Right.
actually, we're going to have a 7B because there's another freak out thing we got to talk about.
Okay.
So what is not accepted whatsoever, so if anyone tells you it is, that's just not true in quantum physics. It's a big, big debate. What's not accepted, that's accepted. That's a phenomenon that's been repeatedly established in all sorts of conditions. What's not established is why. In what's called the orthodox Copenhagen interpretation of the double slit experiment, which we just described.
Right.
It's that the act of observing collapses the wave function.
Okay.
Other people say, absolutely not. That's not true. The orthodox interpretation is wrong. It's more there's infinite universes, and observing picks one of the infinite universes.
Whoa.
And then there are other theories too.
They're all mystical. I mean,
Right, but
like,
no one has explained it where everyone is agreeing on it. So let's just say it's controversial. However, Henry Stapp takes it one step further in his book. He says it's not only the act of observing, and I think you're going to enjoy this.
Yeah.
It's the act of intention. Now this is Henry's view.
Yeah.
And the other quantum physicists in the room were going, that's awesome. It's not accepted. It's not like this has been established. But it's Henry Stapp's perspective that it's not only the act of being aware, but have an intentionality to it that can not create the electron, but have a directionality to what manifests. Now, I don't, myself, I can't say yes or no about it. I'm not enough of a knowledgeable person to say, oh, I really believe in that or don't believe it. I'm intrigued by it. So we
fascinating,
we don't want people to jump away from our conversation and say, oh, Dan and Lee were talking about this and they said intention shapes the probability collapse. We don't know that, but this is Henry Stapp's view.
One hypothesis.
One hypothesis. Yeah.
It's interesting too because this sort of now we get into a little bit of the new age way of thinking of when I think about something and if I have a strong enough intention with enough energy, chi behind it, it has a bigger impact on reality and more likelihood for it to, let's say, manifest from an idea and inspiration into physical reality. So this is kind of the idea of how intention then becomes more likely to be reality, which is interesting and meditative thought.
So let's take that and look at this graph and see if it works at all. And here's where my problem is, at not knowing how to even pursue this. Here, awareness is down here.
Mm-hmm.
Love is down here.
Okay.
The sense of what would drive compassion and kindness down here.
Yeah.
Interconnection here. Okay, fine.
Because if things are one and connected, then we're more compassionate. So this leads to ideas of altruism and
exactly
spiritual concepts of why spiritual people are more compassionate and kind, because there's this sense of oneness between each other and interconnection.
Right. So if you stub your left foot, your right foot doesn't just kick it and say ha na 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 foo foo.
Right.
You don't do that.
Right. No.
So if we're all basically, like this, like one of my students and I were talking about this the other day, if who your private self is like your fingernail and your whole body self is your hand, the whole interconnected nature of reality is your body. Right? So all these are all aspects of one flowing whole.
Right.
So that comes from the plane of possibility, the GOD, right?
Yeah.
The generative diversity. So some people in Christian religion, I'm working with them to say, can we bridge science and spirituality, not just with Christianity, but in general with this GOD view? Okay, fine. Now, if you look up here, here's where, at least at this moment, states of mind and intentionality are placed in plateaus.
Okay.
So let's say you say, I have the intentionality to do yoga, or Tai Chi, or Qigong, or I have the intentionality to turn on the music and let the joy of movement enter me as I let this music, which I've intentionally turned on the radio or whatever, and I'm going to now dance around. I'm moving the tables out of the way with intentionality. I'm making space for this body to just dance this morning. That's my intention. So you'd say, well, how did that come from the plane of possibility?
Yeah.
Well, it would be maybe I was feeling it as a mood I'm in to dance, not swim or surf or whatever you would do, play ping pong. So at some level, you could have like plateaus freely arising to coalesce right now. I've got my dance socks on. I've got making sure the neighbors aren't going to be bothered by the music, rather than getting my bathing suit on and going to the pool or the ocean, right? So intentionality is a vector that directs which clothing I put on or which skills I have, this kind of thing. So it's a flowing, integrated whole. The only thing I'm bringing up is that this would basically say that intentionality and awareness are not the same thing. We want to respect that. So that's one thing.
I sort of see awareness as more, let's say, you know the yin-yang symbol.
Yeah.
Right? So we have yin and yang, one's black, one's white. Each contain a little bit of each other. So the yin, let's say, is intention, yang, attention, but awareness would be the circle around them as the container of both possibilities.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that would be the place where all this stuff can come from.
Interesting.
And, I guess the final thing I say, and then I can put the pillow down, is this 7B implication.
Okay.
And this is, this 7 one about does consciousness influence the probability distribution curve? That's an open question. This one is also an open question, but in 2015, a paper was published in a physics journal called Closing the Final Loophole. So no longer is it controversial, something you may have heard. It was something that Albert Einstein didn't like. He called it spooky action at a distance, and unfortunately he died before these final studies were done to show that it actually wasn't spooky action. It wasn't spooky at all. It was just nature of reality. And it's this. It's called entanglement. It freaks everybody out. What my quantum physics colleagues tell me is it makes them very alienated from their peers because no one wants to hear about this.
Right.
Einstein hated it, but here's what it is.
Okay.
If you take two electrons and you pair them up, they're called entangled.
Okay.
One is spinning clockwise, the other must spin in a complementary way, which would be counterclockwise.
Okay.
Now, you do something to make the counterclockwise one spin clockwise, then the clockwise one is going to go counterclockwise. They're always paired up.
Okay.
They're related to each other.
Right.
They're in a close, intimate connection.
They're in a
two
relationship.
electrons. They're in a relationship,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
You then separate them out by an inch to see if that's going to affect them, how close they have to be to have this influence on each other.
Mm-hmm.
You make one spin the other way, and the other spins the opposite way, inch. So you separate them by a foot, they still do it. 10 feet, they still do it.
Interesting.
100 feet, they still do it. 1,000 feet, they still do it. 10 miles, they still do it.
Really?
1,000 miles, they still do it. A study was just done that looked at things that looked like they were paired together during the Big Bang. They look like they're 100 million light years apart. They're entangled.
Amazing. Maybe.
Exactly. Well, this is the maybe.
Yeah.
So let's just say what's known.
Yeah.
So entanglement has been established. Because in this quantum state, now it looks like it leaks over into the larger macro state world, but let's just stay with the micro state world. Because this has now been established, and we live in bodies that have a feeling like your body's there, my body's here,
Right.
and we talk about spatial separation. Because of this, people have also used the phrase for entanglement as non-locality, meaning if it can influence itself instantaneously. This is why Einstein didn't like it, because it meant something was flowing faster than the speed of light.
That's what I was going to wonder.
Nothing is flowing.
Yeah.
What it's even freakier than that. What it means is that the Newtonian view of separation because of spatial distance is not a quantum dimension.
Whoa.
That relationality of pure energy to electrons is not impeded by spatial separation. So I've asked questions from large audiences, and smaller ones I get the details, but I say, have you ever had a mental communication
Yes.
with someone you were close to who's physically far away from you? It's usually over 90%.
Yeah.
Say yes, and when you get some of the details, you realize you don't think anyway it could be coincidence. I'm not saying that's science, but people won't talk about it because they say it's not possible, it's not possible. Here's, with 1,000 question marks before and after this, here's a possible view. If the mind is an emergent property of energy, as complex as that energy might be, because these studies are just on simple electron things and other things too, but if the mind is an emergent property of energy, and it's now been proven that at the quantum level at least, entanglement is a proven aspect of reality, wouldn't it be weird if the mind didn't have non-local influences?
Right?
That's just 1,000 question marks afterwards.
I love it.
So let no one come from our discussion and say, oh, Lee and Dan were saying the mind has entanglement. No, we're not saying that.
Yeah.
We're saying it might.
It's a good inquiry.
And let's inquire about it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I'll put this down.
Dan, put the pillow down. Huh?
And I'll say, when you learn to live from the plane of possibility, all these things, even my relationship with you, all these things start appearing together that you go, ooh, there's a feeling here. Now, it could be just imagine, but when my students in the workshops or my clients, when they start learning to live from the plane, it happens, they start becoming more aware of things that either are happening at a distance or seem to be what you might have called just like parallel, or what, there's a word for it, I can't think of it now, like resonating. No, there's another
Synchronistic.
word. Synchronistic, yeah, that's the word. That was the word I was thinking. Thank you. Yeah, because
we just did it.
Mind.
We
There
just
you
did
go.
it.
But I mean, this kind of thing. And then you realize, like the big question of what are we here all here for? We're all here, I think, to create more integration. What's integration? It's love, kindness, and compassion. That's what we're all here for. Whether you do it by garnering your body to move chi around, to help someone in Qigong classes, or to do this in a way that manifests, that liberates people's superpowers. If it's not done with compassion and love, it could potentially be done with incredible destructive, because you're going to release a huge amount of energy. And how, if that's driven from the plane of possibility, it'll be driven with love.
Right.
But if it's driven only from a plateau of hatred and shame and envy, it can actually be quite destructive.
Very destructive, yeah.
Energy released in a superpower way is not necessarily good energy in the sense of being what we call generative.
Yeah.
It could be degenerative, rather than leading to compassion, creativity, collaboration, and connection. Those are all part of generativity, and a generative social field would create that. It leads to the opposite, right? Destructive, not constructive, not collaborative, right? Very harmfully separating. And so what we want to do, I think, is if whatever you're working in, trying to really help people become free, is that when they get into the deep kind of freedom, love, interconnection, awareness are what arise.
Amazing, beautiful. Well, as we try to showcase in the movie starts with sort of a quest for power, just energy and power, that's pure. So once this power was acquired, David acquired this power, which is really unusual for a Westerner to be able to generate this sort of crossing the threshold into a superpower of chi, strong energy in the body. It's called lightning power because you can demonstrably feel the strength of it. He thought it was going to change him into this different person, where in fact it didn't. So it became the love of power transforming into the power of love. So afterwards, the end of our film is more about the power of love and really what generates superhuman capacities, qualities, capabilities is this interconnection. To recognize that we're individuals, like a wave in the ocean, but we're also part of the whole ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
And that by recognizing that we're part of a whole, then we feel more kind, compassionate, elevated through all of humankind. And
that's so beautiful. I love that. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And the wave analogy you just gave has two incredible sides to it. One side is, yes, I'm not just a wave, I'm part of the ocean. That's absolutely beautiful. Another side that people often don't realize is, especially when you're sitting on the shore looking out, you see a wave coming toward you. So I'll say to people, I say, well, what do you see?
Yeah.
They go, I see the wave. I go, what's it doing? It's coming toward me. Yes. And what did it do? And then it crashed at my feet. I said, so you saw the wave come and crash at your feet. But what were you really seeing? I saw water crashing at my feet. The water out there came up to me and crashed. Right. You go, no. What was it? Energy. It was kinetic energy pushing this molecule, pushing these molecules. And the thing that crashed at your feet was the energy you saw out there, not the water molecules.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Amazing. It blows your mind.
Yeah. So it's a great analogy on those two levels.
And this movie is really an exploration of energy because we have the energy within the body, which we call power. Then we have the energy of the mind, thoughts, intentions, attention, awareness. And then we have, the energy of spirit, the field of all possibilities. And so that's kind of, you just described perfectly the kind of progression of the movie into all our various aspects of who we are and who we can be, both as individuals and collectively, because I think it's this collective potential that will really help humanity get out of maybe chaos, catastrophe, possible, danger, destruction into something that's much more beautiful.
Right. Well, the beautiful potential I think we all have, and I think your film might really catalyze that, is, the human mind has this passage that goes from category, the way it presumes the world is divided, to concept, the notion of what it believes is how reality is, to a symbol, like a word. And one of those symbols that is tricky and that I think may be getting us in trouble in contemporary culture is the word self. So when the self as a word is built almost like the tip of an iceberg on a concept like, oh, my body is myself, and then a category of, oh, there's this body and there's that other and that other and other. We start othering.
Separations.
Right.
Yeah.
So the word me as being the only source of self could be seen as actually the toxic lie that is destroying life on Earth in just the way you're inferring, because what we can do is say, no, you are the wave, sure, but you're the whole ocean. So you are the body, you get a body to live in. But that's, even though you may have been taught that, that's not all who you are. Right. You are also your relationships with other people, even people not like you, and you are related to all of nature, intra-nature connection. So then you go, well, what's that? That's a we. So this is where we get this fun thing saying you don't have to get rid of your body. You want to learn to move the chi of your body around, be aware of your body. That's me, fine. Maybe that has noun-like qualities and also verb-like qualities. But you're also a we, which is certainly more verb-like. So to integrate the me, to hold on to it, and the we, you don't want to get rid of either. Me plus we, you can come together as a we. So we have a we initiative where we're bringing all different languages in. Like in Spanish, you would say yo for me and vosotros for we, but then you go yosotros.
That's awesome.
And there's all these fun ways where we talk about moi.
I love it.
Yeah, so this is where we is so happy to do this project with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of that's really the foundation. That's the truth, is that, we aren't separate. We're connected. And I think some people feel like maybe they get lost in a oneness, but really I like the word wholeness, because we are individual just in the same way. We have individual cells with individual roles that they do for our whole body. So we can be individual within this whole universe doing an individual thing for the whole.
Right, and that's where the concept of integration may be very helpful for you, because integration means honoring the differences and not losing them when you create the linkages. So it's more like a fruit salad, not a smoothie. You don't have to grind things up and homogenize them.
Yeah.
It's not blended.
Right.
Everyone can be unique and be interconnected to create that integrated whole.
Yeah, the sum is greater than. Yeah.
The whole that sparks. That's exactly what Mui is about.
Really.
Right.
I love it. Dan, thanks so much. Brilliant. I learned so much. I'm going to be meditating on this interview.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's awesome. And just this way in which we can, again, Mui, the shuffling together of Western thought, Eastern thought, to create even a greater capacity to understand the wholeness.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you again.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right, Lee.
Yeah,
Thanks.
my friend.
So good.
Yeah. So good.